Morning, everyone. Good to see you. If you're wondering, thanks, John. If you're wondering why there's a few seats missing here, we had a baptism last weekend, and it was fantastic. And the font decided we might spread some of the love into the carpet as well. So we're just letting that dry out before we start using it again. When was the last time you travelled on a plane? Bought a ticket, you figure out where you're going to go, you put in where you're starting from, you put in your destination, you put in the date you want to travel, all the options come up, you choose which flight you want to take, and your job's done, isn't it? No, because you then go on, and then it asks you, what else would you like to add? And screen after screen pops up. Would you like to take insurance? Would you like to choose to reduce your carbon footprint on this flight? Would you like to have carry-on or check-in? Would you like to buy food beforehand to save yourself some money? And then do you want to choose your seat? And you get your ticket, but then you start adding all these other things onto it, and what you thought was a bargain, all of a sudden it's like, oh man, that's like 3 times what it was at the beginning. I was listening to a guy share about this, and he said, I bought a ticket, and then it told me I had to pay for my seat. He's like, isn't that the point of buying a ticket, that I get a seat? And someone explains, yeah, but that's just to choose where you want to go. But all these add-ons had created so much confusion for this person that they started questioning the whole point of buying the plane ticket in the first place. Don't I buy it so that I can go to where I want to go? Why do I need all this other stuff? And he was questioning the whole thing. We're starting a new series exploring the book of Colossians. It's called Greater Than. And over the next 4 weeks, we're going to be looking at one chapter of Colossians per week. And I want to encourage you, Colossians, 4 chapters, it's a small book. I want to encourage you to read. Now, if you're really game, read all 4 chapters once a day. Otherwise, just do 1 chapter a day. When you get to the end, on the 5th day, go back to chapter 1, and just keep reading and reading and reading through this book. As you do that, things will start opening up for you. But then also, as we get together each Sabbath and talk about it, you'll have a good idea of where this is coming from, and you'll be able to understand the text greater. So we're looking at the book of Colossians, and this letter is written to a church who were being enticed by a whole bunch of add-ons to their walk with Jesus. And this letter is about helping them deal with those add-ons. What do we do about that? See, they were told essentially that their walk with Jesus was you accept Jesus, plus you add this, plus you add that, plus you look at it this way, plus you take this on. And so it was an addition. Jesus wasn't enough, you had to add stuff to it as well. And so this is what's happening in this church. But as we explore this book, we find that the author of this letter, instead of saying this is about Jesus plus, he says, no, that's not the right equation. The actual equation is Jesus, it's not about having Jesus plus something. It's about making Jesus greater than everything. And so we're exploring the book of Colossians. This is a book written by Paul. And if you go through your Bible, you see the books of Paul put in that order. I'm not sure if you knew this. Cool little fact. They're actually in the order of longest to shortest. Romans, longest book. And to a church, 2 Thessalonians is the shortest book to church. So churches and then individuals, both are listed in longest to shortest. If you were to put them chronologically, when we think they were most likely written, it would probably look more like this. 1 Thessalonians, Galatians, 2 Thessalonians. Colossians kind of comes in the middle of his writing. We think probably around AD 60. Paul writes this book to this church in Colossae from prison. And this little town of Colossae, it's, if you can see it there, it's kind of right in the middle. There's 3 towns all together that make a triangle. It's sat on the main trading route from east to west. So when it was first established, this town grew really quickly because it was a place where people would come through, they would stop. A lot of trade took place in the area. But then we had these other churches come up, or other cities, Laodicea and Hierapolis, and they became bigger than Colossae, and so they kind of took a lot of the population away. And at the time that Paul writes this letter to this church, it was probably more like a smallish town. There was farming, there was agriculture, so it wasn't as big as the towns next to it. But what's interesting is Paul actually never went there, that we know of. The church there was started most likely by a guy called Epaphras. Epaphras, from what we can understand, was most likely in Ephesians, in Ephesus. And when Paul was in Ephesus, Epaphras was there, and then he went and took this message that Paul had told him about Jesus, about the gospel, and he takes it back to his people in Colossae, but then also he shared it with those in Laodicea, and we think probably Hierapolis as well. But while Paul had never been to this church, he knew about them. And he heard good things from Epaphras about what these believers of Jesus in Colossae were up to, what they were doing, how they were going. And this is what he says. He says, "We've heard of your faith and love that spring from the hope stored up for you in heaven, and about which you have already heard in the true message of the gospel that's come to you." So he's saying, we've heard about you, we've heard about your faith, the hope that you have, the way you walk with Jesus, and that is so good. But then he writes this letter after what happens from this point on. He then goes on to actually explain that, hey guys, you seem to be taking a Jesus plus something approach in your walk with him. And the challenge is, like a lot of other Paul's letters, in those ones he actually explains what the problems are. In this one, he actually doesn't list it. He doesn't say, you're dealing with this, this, and this. We have to kind of deduce from the way he responds what the challenges were in this church. And as we do that, there's a few things that come up. They had a Jesus plus performance approach. That you kind of had to, yes, you had to accept Jesus, you had to follow Jesus, but also you had to kind of work your way to have that salvation through good behavior. In theological terms, that'd be legalism, that you have to perform a certain way in order for Jesus to accept you. So there he talks about religious traditions that they feel like they do or don't have to follow, and we'll unpack this as we go on through the book. And as you read it each day, you'll find that as well. But then it's not just that, it's also, there's a Jesus plus philosophies and special knowledge. Paul uses the term mystery a lot in this book. And if you've heard of Gnosticism before, it was kind of a belief. We don't think it was actually around at this time. This seems to be like an early form of Gnosticism. But Gnosticism was this idea that there was this secret special knowledge, and if you had it, you were in. And there are lots of people who didn't have it, and so you wanted to make sure that you had that special secret knowledge that no one else had. It was a real superiority thing that they brought in, and it was full of Greek philosophy and kind of overthinking things to the nth degree. That's kind of what it was. But then there was also this other thing that was there, because Jesus, in this book, Paul talks a lot also about Jesus and who he was and what he did, and he's doing his best to deal with this thing at the time, which was called Docetism, which basically was this fancy religious term to say there were people that didn't believe that Jesus was fully human. It was kind of a spirit form of Jesus that went through everything. And you think through the implications of that belief, Jesus' death, Jesus' suffering, Jesus' resurrection. If he wasn't fully human, what does that mean for us? So this was starting to creep in, and Paul's trying to go, hey, this is one of the challenges you guys are facing. This is one of the plus beliefs that are coming in, and it's impacting their walk. So there's this Jesus plus performance, Jesus plus special knowledge and philosophies, and then Jesus plus a certain way of life. Paul talks about these things which they are or aren't doing or feel like they should be doing, and in unpacking it, he helps us see that there was a way of life that was starting to kind of infiltrate into the church that just seemed like it was not the way of Jesus or what he taught. The religious term for this one is, well, there's two. Asceticism, which is like this belief that you kind of need to be really strict on yourself and not do anything that makes you feel good or that might bring joy or happiness because that's how you make yourself look better. And the other one is mysticism, which is where it's not about the reality, it's about the experience, it's about the feeling. And so these things are all creeping in, and Paul is in this space, and he's writing to help clear things up. And he's focusing on the reality of Jesus and what he did. He's focusing on the gospel. He's talking about how to live practically as a follower of Jesus. What does that actually look like? But in doing all of this in his letter, he reveals Jesus. And academic William Barclay makes this quote, which helps us understand why this matters, why this is important. He says, it's not until the church is confronted with some dangerous heresy that she begins to realize the riches and the wonder of orthodoxy. It's not until we, as a community, have to face something that challenges us that we start to realize how important it is what we believe. While that's true for a community, it's equally true for us as individuals. It's not until a man finds his faith opposed and attacked that he really begins to think out the implications of that faith. And the reality is that's going to come to all of us if it hasn't already. In high school, you have friends that have different beliefs. They're going to raise questions, and you think, hey, that's different from what I've heard. When you hit uni, it's going to be that times 10. Because there's a whole bunch of different people from all different backgrounds coming together, and you're mixing, and you're talking, and you're sharing, and you get to hear how other people see their worldviews, and you're like, whoa, that is really different to what I believe. Where do I sit with that? I think sometimes as you go to the workplace, the conversation around that stuff kind of slows down a bit, maybe. But you can encounter it there as well. We're all going to have that point where we get something that challenges our faith. And it may not be a person. It may be an experience, a moment. That's going to happen, and that's okay that happens. It's how we respond to it that matters. And Colossians, as you read through this book daily, as you read through it, you see that Colossians is actually an insight into how to deal with those moments, how to deal with those situations, how to deal with those conversations when they come up that challenge your faith. So what does Paul suggest? Well, just from chapter 1, I want to go through a few things that Paul kind of starts to extrapolate on how to deal with these situations. In chapter 1, verse 9 and 10, Paul says, "We continually ask God to fill you with the knowledge of his will through all the wisdom and understanding the Spirit gives, so that you may live a life worthy of the Lord and please him in every way." Now, I don't know how you respond when you hear that last bit, please him in every way. Some of you might go, oh, that makes me feel like I'm a kid again and I have to do all these right things at church for Jesus to be happy with me. But look at what Paul says. If you've got a Bible, open up to Colossians 1. If you've got a blue aqua Bible, it's page 1015. Colossians chapter 1. And I love how Paul puts this. So he talks about being filled by God, knowing his will, and pleasing the Lord. But look, he says what means pleasing the Lord. It is being strengthened, bearing fruit in every good work, growing in the knowledge of God, being strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, so that you may have great endurance and patience, and giving joyful thanks to the Father, who's qualified you to share in the inheritance of his holy people in the kingdom of light. Is this about performance? Bearing fruit is a result of your walk with Jesus. It's not what you do to prove your walk, to have the walk with Jesus. It's a result of it. Growing in the knowledge of God, it's not about performance. That's something we get to do as we get to spend time with Jesus. Being strengthened in power, that's not something we do ourselves. That's something God does for us. Giving thanks to him, well, that's a pretty nice way to live, being grateful, isn't it? So already Paul is saying, giving these little hints, hey guys, you've been focused on performance and the things you have to do, but here he's saying, well, stay with Jesus, let him bear the fruit in you, let him give you the knowledge that you can grow in, let him strengthen you in power. Okay, so maybe you have to please God, you have to give thanks. Well, hey, that doesn't sound like a performance-based religion that Paul's promoting. And so he gives it, but then he goes on, and he says, he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body. Remember that whole thing about Jesus wasn't fully human? Jesus has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish, free from accusation. That's what he's done. That's not something you earned. That's what he has done for you. But then he goes, oh, hang on. If you continue in your faith. Well, is this now becoming a works-based thing? If you continue in your faith, established and firm, and do not move from the hope held out in the gospel. Yes, they need to do something. Continue trusting Jesus. It's not they need to do all these boxes, tick all these boxes. It's keep trusting Jesus. Grow in that faith. It's not about performance. It's about having a faith in Jesus. And then Paul goes on to drill down really to who Jesus is. Look what he says here. This is probably the famous passage of Colossians. He says, the Son is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is everything. He is number one. He is greater than all the things, all the beings, all the people. He has the supremacy over everything. So it's not actually about having this special knowledge. It's about having a special person. It's about knowing Jesus. And then he talks about how to live. And towards the end of the chapter, he's in prison because of what he'd done, sharing Jesus. And he says, "Now I rejoice in what I'm suffering for you. I've become its servant," talking about the gospel, "by the commission of God gave me to present you to the word of God in its fullness. The mystery that has been kept hidden for ages and generations, but is now disclosed to the Lord's people." You see elements of special knowledge, see elements of mystery, see elements of breaking all that down and say, that's all been revealed, that doesn't matter anymore, because you know what it is. That mystery is actually Jesus. That mystery is God's love for people and how he's revealed that through Jesus, and how Jesus is the fullness of God. But following the way of Jesus looks different. Because yes, there is suffering. It's something Jesus experienced. It's something the New Testament is full of, saying that if you choose to follow Jesus, it's not all rainbows and unicorns. It is going to get difficult. Because we live in a world that is opposed to who Jesus is. But the key difference between this and those ascetics who are like, oh yeah, we need to be tough on ourselves, they suffered to do good. They suffered to look good, sorry. For them, suffering was a way of going, oh, look at me, I'm pale and hungry because I've been fasting for 4 weeks. But Paul's suffering is because of Jesus and because he wants to share Jesus with other people so they can be presented with the gospel. And so once again, he's coming back. It's all about Jesus. And the goal of all of this suffering and learning and knowledge and time is to be presented and become mature in Christ. It's to grow. It's to develop. Not to stay where you were, but actually continually become more and more mature in Jesus. So instead of a Jesus plus approach to what they're experiencing, Paul's advice is something different. Because they could try and attack those philosophies and break them down, but Paul's actually saying, hey, Jesus is great. Jesus is bigger. In Greek mythology, there's an island. And on this island, there are these women who are half birds. I'm going to call them ladybirds. And they could sing really well. And in the mythology, they would sing these songs. And as the ships were going past this island, the singing was just so beautiful that these ships and the captains would start they couldn't help it. They would just start coming towards the island to hear this music. They were drawn to it. But the trick was, around the island were all these massive rocks. And those ships would get shipwrecked on the rocks. And so this was this view in mythology, and we see it coming through in Greek literature in the 7th century BC. So this is 750 years before the people of Colossae were hearing about Jesus. In a book, has anyone read The Odyssey? The Odyssey, I should separate my words, by Homer. In this story, part of the journey is that he's on this ship and he needs to go past this island. And there's no way around it. He has to go there, but he doesn't want to get drawn in and dashed on the rocks and pulled in by the siren song. So what he does is, when they get closer, in his book, Odysseus, he puts wax in all of the rowers' ears so they can't hear the song. But he wants to hear it, so he gets them to tie him to a mast. So he's tied there. He can't get drawn in. He can't go. But they have this plan to deal with the song, to deal with the distraction. A few hundred years later, a guy called Rhodius wrote a book called Argonautica. It's around 3rd century BC. And he too talks about this island, and he too talks about the siren song. But he has a completely different approach to how to deal with the challenge and the distraction that was there. In his book, he talks about this guy called Orpheus. And Orpheus was like one of our band leaders. He was a musician, he was a singer, and he had an amazing voice. And so on his ship, when they get near this island, instead of trying to block it out and stop themselves from being drawn into it, he starts singing. And his voice is so beautiful and it's so captivating and alluring that instead of listening to the siren song, everyone on the boat just starts listening to him, and they don't even hear what's going on around them. They completely miss it, and they travel past the island safely. In Colossians, Paul is giving practical advice about how not to be distracted by all add-ons. And at his core, he's saying, take Jesus more seriously. At his core, he's saying, put him first, focus on him, and as you do that, you'll find he is so captivating, he is so compelling that all the other distractions won't have the same power to pull you away as they once did. But there's a question that you need to answer in order to determine how you're going to deal with this. And it was put forward by C.S. Lewis. We may note in passing that Jesus was never regarded as a mere moral teacher. He didn't produce that effect on any of the people who actually met him. He produced mainly 3 effects: hatred, terror, and adoration. There was no trait of people expressing mild approval. So who is Jesus to you? There's 4 possible responses. 1, hatred. And if you're listening to this and that's you, good on you for listening to this point. I hope you can get to know someone, Jesus, and know that he doesn't hate you, that he loves you. Terror. If that's your response to who Jesus is, then can I encourage you to be brave and persist? Because when you meet the real Jesus, you realize that there's actually nothing to be afraid of. This is one small step of getting to know him. Mild approval, if that's your approach, if that's your view of Jesus, then perhaps you haven't actually met him. Perhaps you haven't taken the time to get to know who he is, to get to know what he's like. Because I think C.S. Lewis was right. Everyone who had an interaction with Jesus, who met him, there was no one who just said, oh yeah, okay. Or adoration. You can't take your eyes off him. You want to spend time with him. You look to him. You let his goodness, you let his love have your full attention, so the distractions and the add-ons that come just fade away. I want to invite the team up and let you respond to Jesus as we sing the song, Turn Your Eyes Upon Him. Look full in his wonderful, beautiful face, and as we do, all those distractions like the siren song, they will fade away as we focus on him.